Afternoon and welcome to the show. I'm Jim Fleizik. During today's show, we will discuss progress being made as we move forward with identity management and continuous monitoring programs in the federal government. With me today on the show are Jeremy Grant, the Senior Executive Advisor for Identity Management at NIST, Ashley Stevenson, Chief Architect of the ICAM program, Department of Homeland Security, Paul Grant, Strategy Advisor for Cybersecurity, Department of Defense, Office of the CIO, Ellen Sundra, the Federal Systems Engineer, Forescout Technologies, Paul Chrisman, the Vice President, Dell Software Public Sector, and Jennifer Knoll, the Senior Director for Strategic Programs, U.S. Public Sector, Symantec. Let's get into this issues, and let's talk about some progress since our last show. Let's start with Jeremy Grant over at NIST. Jeremy, give us some examples of where you see some progress being made with your identity programs.
Sure. Well, it's been a great year. I'm at NIST, and I think I differ a little bit from some of the other folks here in that the program that I lead, the National Strategy for Trusted Identities in Cyberspace, or NSTIC as it's known, isn't focused just on the federal government, but is actually focused on developing better identity solutions for the entire country.
Right, kind of like securing the internet, right?
It's a big part of it, yeah. Certainly when you look at, the problems with passwords these days, if you look at the data breach investigations report that comes out every year from Verizon and a bunch of law enforcement agencies, the 2013 report showed a whopping 76% of network intrusions were tied to passwords, which is a stunning number. It means it's an anomaly these days when a breach happens and it's not actually being exploited through taking advantage of a password. So, we've really focused our efforts since the president signed the NSTIC 3.5 years ago in 3 areas, and I'm excited about the progress we're making in all 3. A lot of the problem has really just been how do you actually convene different stakeholders together to talk about how strong credentials could be used interoperably. We've got a privately led identity ecosystem steering group. They actually incorporated as a 501c3 not-for-profit over the last year and are managing themselves, starting to raise some of their own funds, making really good progress on a framework of standards and policies to provide an underpinning for this identity ecosystem, this marketplace of identity solutions we're looking to catalyze. We've got more than a dozen pilots that are active right now, where we're seeing veterans, doctors, patients, consumers, online banking, all making use of new types of advanced identity solutions and enabling lots of new business models that weren't possible before because things just weren't secure if you didn't know if somebody was a dog on the internet. And in the government side, we'll talk a little bit more in this show later about some of the progress we're making with the stand-up of the Federal Cloud Credential Exchange and a new service called Connect.gov that'll make it much easier for agencies to share a pool of common, strong credentials that citizens can use when they're engaging in new types of transactions online.
Excellent. Look forward to getting into that. Paul Grant, how about over DoD? Paul, you have a long history in working identity issues, so give us some idea of some of the progress you see being made now.
The defense committed to a strong credentials several decades ago. About 15 years ago, committed a large amount of resources and efforts to create the Common Access Card, which has now become the PIV card for DoD. Our drivers at that time were information assurance, are now called improved posture for cybersecurity, and business process change. Going paperless in our business process was a driver in us committing to spend so much money.
Sure.
We use the cards now rather extensively for network access and logical access. Physical access is still too heavy on using it as a flash, but we're automating that process now in a program that's actually doing background checks on the fly with NCIC and with a terrorist screening database for physical access to our installations. A key thing that says we're making some success is that our users have hit a tipping point where when they're asked to get a user ID password, they balk at it because the experience with the PIV card is so easy for them.
Sure.
They use it, and they complain if they are not allowed to use their PIV card, which I think is great. I think that'll grow as other executive branch organizations use their PIV more and more. They'll see that our users like that experience. Because of maturity in network and logical access, we're now moving our emphasis towards dynamic access management, to be able to grant access dynamically, which is the harder part of the problem that we have now, our current emphasis.
Sure. Interesting, very interesting. I know that password thing. I mean, every time you read about these breaches in the private sector, the advice is change your password. So then you go in, you have to start thinking of all your passwords, and then you get to the point where no one remembers what passwords they're now using, and it makes the problem even worse. But Paul Chrisman, how about over Dell? How are you positioning to support customers in the identity management world?
So, Jim, Dell Software has a whole variety of offerings that revolve around identity management, especially in the public sector, whether it's DoD or civilian, even into healthcare, Jeremy mentioned. very, very critical databases of information that contain very sensitive information, how that's protected, how that's shared. So we get into privacy, we also get into security. We're seeing progress in 3 specific areas. And the first 2 are a little bit softer, and the third one's a little bit harder. The first is the comment that Paul just made a second ago, and this is the shift away from IT being responsible for security and really engaging and involving the end user in the discussion, and Paul's comment about the users expecting and participating in the implementation of PIV or CAC. That expectation is really, really helpful to shift the focus away from IT and engage the end users. The end users with passwords, we wish passwords would go away. We wish we could get rid of them. But because the user is the critical point of security, we see a very, very healthy dialogue shift away from security as IT to security as everyone's responsibility. Second is, it's again a softer issue, is that security is really being driven away from things and back towards data. And the idea of protecting data rather than objects is really a healthy way of looking at things, in our conversation about continuous diagnostics and monitoring really takes a healthier look at, yes, you have to secure the things, but really what you're trying to do is secure the data. And finally, the last thing I'll mention is a very technical aspect, and that is we're making huge progress on trusted and privileged account management. This is imperative, especially when you have systems administrators, that they are given special treatment when they perform that function.
Right.
So we're seeing huge improvements in that last area, but it's more of a technical issue than the first 2.
Yeah, great. Man, what a novel idea to include the actual customers and the users in designing the solutions. Something I think that IT struggled with for some time, but you're exactly right. You're right on. Ashley Stevenson over at DHS. How about identity management? And I know DHS plays a major role, especially with the continuous diagnostics and mitigation piece of this thing. Can you tell us a little bit about some progress over at DHS?
Certainly. So thanks for having me, Jim.
Sure.
And I think the first thing I'd like to talk about is I'm seeing some significant increase overall in the use of strong authentication or strong credentials. Certainly at DHS with the use of PIV cards for network access, which I'll talk a little bit more about later on, but also just in general, I think citizens, through the work that NSTIC is doing, are getting ready to make progress about using stronger credentials, getting rid of passwords, and using strong credentials as well between how departments and agencies talk to each other and how they federate and how they do that. So I think that the other thing that we're seeing progress starting to be made is in access control convergence. And that's
Okay.
really about making the physical access control systems part of the overall ecosystem and treating them as first-class citizens. And we're seeing within DHS and with other agencies, those physical access control systems being brought online, connected to the network, having an authority to operate, and being able to do things like go check the validity of your PKI certificate on that card in real time,
Right.
and also to be able to have user accounts and privileges provisioned dynamically to those systems instead of manually.
Yeah.
So I think those are some of the areas where we're really starting to see progress.
Wow, excellent. You know, and you bring up a good point there, because I think when we talk identity management, some people think of, identifying people, but identity management can be much broader. Identifying people, identifying devices and networks, identifying good bits, bad bits, and so forth and so forth, and where the continuous diagnostics comes into play. Jennifer Knoll, over at Symantec, I guess, when I think of Symantec, I think you guys, this has sort of like been your business for, a core of your business is involved with security and identity management. Can you give us some ideas, some progress you're seeing with your customer base?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the threats that you started with, Jim, have certainly made our customers and partners much more aware, and just the community at large, the awareness of identity management and how it can be an enabler to prevent those kinds of things. When we talk about trying to see some progress within even the federal government versus, and agencies in the federal government, I think there are a couple things that each one of the panelists have already actually touched on, which is, are we focused on citizen to government, government to government? Are we just trying to look at network access with inside an agency? And when I think of the goals of NSTIC that Jeremy mentioned, it's really to create that federated identity ecosystem that we can build. And we've seen such a growth. I mean, historically, over the last 15 years, we've moved from this network access, internal enterprise from agency to how do we actually provide that to our user base and our community as a citizen. Even if you look at the most recent hack of the Apple iCloud, what was the first thing that Apple said? It's let's raise and put strong authentication out
Right.
there for the citizens to use to back up into the cloud. So the awareness is just impressive. And as I work very closely, obviously, in the civilian space right now, and I think we're seeing a lot of progress with the awareness of the Federal Cloud Credential Exchange on how do we get our community, again, going back to the citizens, much more aware of the importance of strong authentication. So that educational process is part of the learning in order for people to adopt.
Yeah, excellent. Well said. Excellent points there. Sandra, over at Fort Scout, tell us a little bit about how Fort Scout is working these issues to support your customer base.
Sure. Thanks, Jim. What we're seeing is that there's been a lot of progress with the integration between the identity management tools as well as the continuous monitoring tools. We're finding that a lot of federal agencies are looking for solutions that are completely integrated. So they provide complete visibility of the network. Again, not only the users, but those devices that are out there on the network, what those devices are. Looking for integration with access control and automation. So finding those devices and then what do we do with them. So all of those are really key components in a zero trust model,
Right.
which is really important for Fort Scout, that we offer that integration and that complete solution.
Yeah, you know what's exciting for me here is just as a takeaway right out of the box is hearing how DHS is working, DHS and coordinating with other agencies, DoD with the ICAMs working across government, and then Jeremy working all these issues on a national scale, and all of you coordinating together. It kind of like has this vision of things coming together down the road, as opposed to the ships passing in the night not realizing they just missed one another. Paul Grant, give me a specific program where you think identity management's making a big difference. Can you?
It's hard to give a specific, it's a very broad front set of progress. Recent attacks we've seen in the press, our strong credentialing and our defense in depth have helped the DoD deal with those better than most, which is good. In the business process area, I can give examples. For example, 10 years ago, we started automating our defense travel system, which is an identity-based
Right.
service. And as we got that system automated and available for our people to use, they had the agility now to make the system better. So now, for example, from the DTS, I can access the TSA's pre-check program
Okay.
and register my common access card, and I'm now qualified for pre-check because the automation has allowed us to extend the business process across other departments. That's happening in general in many of our business applications, where because it's been automated, identity is no longer is provided as a service to them. They have agility to change things.
Right.
That's been a big deal. We have a thing called Misa, Identity Matching Engine for Security and Analysis, which is a physical access support system, but it's a decision-based process where when a person requests access to an installation or to a facility, we can run the IMISA, check against the FBI's NCIC, and against the terrorist screening database as some attributes to be looked at prior to granting that physical access.
Right.
We're doing this across, in many ways, in many applications. It's hard to pick just the one.
Yeah.
Emphasis right now is on credentialing mobile devices
Okay.
for people and for doing the classified side, the National Security System secret level PKI for the executive branch. That's a big push for us as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And for our defense industrial base partners.
Cool. Very cool. Yeah, and I love that TSA program. I kind of have this, I try not to smile, as I walk past the people in line, which I get to go first. Ashley Stevenson, what about a specific program that you can point to where you think you're actually making a difference or making significant progress?
Sure. I'm really glad to be able to say that it's not just because I work there, but at DHS, the collective ICAM community, the people who support ICAM across all of the DHS components, have really come together in the past 12 months to move forward our use at DHS of strong credentials, of the PIV card, to log on to the network. So the numbers to back that up are, at the beginning of fiscal year 14, we had 31% of our user base, which is a pretty large user base across the department, that was required to use their PIV card to log into the network. And as we closed out FY14, it was 85%.
Oh, wow.
So 85% of the department is now no longer using passwords to log into their computers to get access to the network. They're using their PIV card and their PIN instead. And I think it's a fantastic.
Well, I do think that is a great story of progress, because we all know how easy it is to coordinate across all of DHS on these.
Exactly.
As a matter of fact, all agencies. Jeremy, a specific program, something that you can hang your hat on and say, say this specific program is really making a difference?
Sure. Well, as we're on the topic of interagency coordination, I think one thing that we've seen as we're talking a lot about NSTIC is agencies paying more attention to some of these attacks that are out in the public space. Jennifer mentioned earlier the iCloud hack this summer. I think Apple did a better job of convincing the American people that if you have sensitive personal data that's stored in the cloud, you really shouldn't protect it with only a password.
Right.
And agencies, of course, are looking at that and looking at some of the data-centric applications they want to move online and saying, we need to have a solution on our side as well. So Jennifer mentioned the Federal Cloud Credential Exchange, which is an interagency effort that was launched by the White House. We've been heavily involved in it, to help support the implementation of NSIC across the federal government. The basic idea is we have this growing ecosystem of private sector credential providers from firms like Symantec that have gone through a pretty rigorous process over the General Services Administration to have their solution certified for government use, using types of strong credentials that are much better than a password. But for agencies to integrate with them has been hard, and this is essentially an easy button that will be going live next month, enabling citizens to be able to use the same strong credential across multiple sites. It's the kind of thing, particularly as you look at all of the data we want to unleash, giving government data back to citizens, enabling to access more information. It provides the kind of security and privacy infrastructure underneath it that will really enable a whole bunch of new types of applications that we think can really transform the way governments and citizens can interact online.
Neat, very neat, very neat. I'm anxious to hear about these pilots, and if I can participate, I'd love to do that too. Jennifer Knoll, how about Symantec? Can you point to a specific program where you think we're really seeing some identity management, continuous monitoring is making a big difference?
Yeah, I'm going to piggyback off Jeremy because I would say we've been very heavily, I would say more recently, right, Jim? So when I look at Managed PKI and the things that we've done over the years, we've always been very involved for very strong authentication to LOA levels of assurance 4, all the way down to LOA 3, 2, and 1, which is how do we decide which audiences want what level of assurance. But these programs all meet the needs of those to help solve problems for these constituents. Federal Cloud Credential Exchange, to me, is the most important one for the community because we are seeing progress where it is the easy button. You can go into a central place and now it's normalized. You have a credential and you get different access to different services as a citizen. That's the vision of the future,
Sure.
right? That I can feel like no matter if I'm a mother and I have all these things I want to access as a U.S. citizen, but I'm also an employee of Symantec, can I do all of those things that I want to do to make myself known as I am who I say I am, and I need access to my banking, I need access to my taxes, I need access to, so that is a very successful program that we need the entire community to get behind it. Industry, government, policy, it's an important motivation to the future.
Absolutely.
So good
And
progress.
well said. I'm absolutely convinced if we get that authentication thing nailed, the amount of applications that we'll have in the future that are just going to explode even more so than what we've seen to date. I mean, it's just going to become just a wide open field for new creative and innovative ideas if you have that authentication piece in place. I want to hear from Dell and Forescout on the same issue, but first we need to take a short break. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM. Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM. I'm Jim Fleisig here with Jeremy Grant from NIST, Ashley Stevenson from Homeland Security, Paul Grant from the DoD, Ellen Sundra from Forescout, Paul Chrisman from Dell Software, and Jennifer Knoll from Symantec. We're talking identity management and continuous monitoring. When we went to break, we had not heard yet from Paul Chrisman about some specific programs that you believe are making a difference or that you're seeing these programs help. Paul, can you give us some comments on the things you're seeing?
Sure, Jim. And I was saying at the break, I'm going to give Jeremy a nice compliment. I think one of the biggest things that I've seen from the clients we work with as an improvement is the NIST framework for the protection of critical infrastructure. That framework I've seen cited by every type of public sector entity out there. It is a wonderful framework to begin the discussion around security and about protection and about how we tackle this really, really complicated topic. So I think that the framework itself is not prescriptive. It's really a discussion starter. And it is applicable to so many different industries, whether it's private or whether it's public, and it is a great advancement in the discussion for how we tackle this problem. So props to the NIST folks.
Okay, very well. And you're right. I mean, I hear about the NIST framework everywhere I go. So it certainly is something that is making a difference. Ellen Sundra, let's talk more about the continuous monitoring stuff here. It clearly continuous monitoring, continuous diagnostics, and mitigation are hot topics out there. Can you talk a little bit maybe about how these programs are evolving and how perhaps they're helping us get in front of some of these threats?
Absolutely. So what we've seen is going away from the paper reporting, those long checklists that
Right.
organizations have to go through
Right.
and manually look for, into more of a continuous monitoring diagnostics, where we have real-time or near real-time situational awareness of what's happening on the network. Not only the devices, but who's connecting. So anytime that we can tie in the devices that are connecting, who's connecting on those devices, and then the state of those devices, right? So we want to know, when was the last time that endpoint was checked for compliance or known vulnerabilities? All of that's really important to have real time, because a lot of times previously when we're checking for things, by the time we create this long list of the status of that endpoint, it's out of date.
It's too late. Yeah.
So right. So then tying that in with tools that provide automation. So when we do find something that's out of compliance, what do we do with that endpoint? How do we bring it into compliance? And then ultimately the access control, right? Traditionally, we have tools that are alert and inform. Something's out of compliance, it alerts a human that has to go in and do something about it. So that integration, and it's sort of my theme here, is it's really important to tie these tools together. So when we do find something that we don't know about or that's non-compliant, then we can remove it. And then again, we mentioned the certificates. We want to make sure that these endpoints are compliant and that they have valid certificates on them. So tying all those tools together is really important when we look at defense in depth.
Yeah.
And then sharing information between those depths, right? Between those layers of defense, not just keeping the information at each layer.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. You're right. I mean, things have to be done in real time these days. I mean, computers, threats happens in nanoseconds. So, I mean, it's not like there's time to react. Things can, explode very, very quickly in the world of automation. Let's go to Ashley Stevenson and talk a little bit about continuous diagnostics and mitigation, which I know DHS plays a significant role there. Are you seeing progress in getting out in front and proactive in front of some of these threats with some of the things you're doing over there at DHS?
Yeah, absolutely, and I'm seeing a really good potential for progress. So interesting thing about CDM is it's split up into phases. And the second phase of CDM is about people and access. Right, so it's broken up into these different pillars, and we need to get that real-time data about how do we trust our people? Do we trust them, and to what level do we trust them? The behavior, what are they doing on the network, and should they be doing that or not? And are they trained in the type of access that they're having? And then credentials, what type of credentials do they have? What's the strength of those credentials? How are those credentials linked to user accounts and applications? Right. And finally, privileges. What privileges do they have to do things on our applications, or what doors and turnstiles and gates can they get into? So CDM, like ICAM, is data-driven, and the ICAM architecture is poised to provide and centralize a lot of that data that CDM needs in order to be able to meet the 72-hour currency cycle that's required. So you're not going and getting pieces of paper and doing data calls. It has to be more rapid. And so that's a really interesting intersection between ICAM and CDM, especially for phase 2 and meeting those data requirements.
Yeah, it's great points there. Well said. It brings it a lot into perspective. Jeremy, does CDM work into your NSTIC program? And
I think it's something, as Ashley was saying, that's really enabled when you have good identity solutions. A big part of CDM is figuring out who's on your network and what are they doing. Well, if you're only figuring out who's on your network with something as weak as a password, good luck knowing if it's really legitimate users or not.
Right.
Likewise, if you have better identity solutions, it's much easier to sort out who are the legitimate users, and then the ones who aren't are going to stick out like a sore thumb. Makes it much harder for somebody to impersonate a legitimate person on a network.
yeah, very good. And I liked what Ashley said there. If you get the authentication piece done, then you can start adding the privilege to that authentication. Paul, what do you think in the terms of CDM, continuous monitoring, and how it fits into the programs you're working?
I think that the Identity, Credential, and Access Management effort in DoD, we call it IDAM, is fundamental to achieving the goals of continuous monitoring and the goals which for non-person entities and for services, and for the continuous evaluation of person entities, people, which
Right.
is the insider threat,
Sure.
addressing both malicious and accidental mistakes. So the CM is for the NPE, and the CE is for the person on our net.
Sure.
It's a major tool that we're going to be using in the Joint Information Environment in DoD, which is our major IT initiative across the entire department, where our enterprise operations centers and our regional operations centers, we use CM and CE to help us manage the network, both classified and unclassified networks. We have the enterprise ops center is here in the States, and there'll be several regional centers in the States. European center stood up, Pacific Center is standing up.
Okay.
And these the CM tools will help us to be able to proactively manage the network, dynamically reconfigure it, quarantine areas that have problems while we solve it. And again, the information from the CM will allow our operators to better manage and control our assets and protect it.
Yeah, terrific. Jennifer Knoll, how about CM, continuous monitoring, and it fits with your identity solutions?
Well, I couldn't agree with Paul more, right? IDM is a critical component to continuous monitoring truly being successful. And I think what we're seeing is there's different maturity levels. In the civilian government, it's interesting that what CDM has really allowed them to do is to be able to create a reliable baseline foundation of what security posture should look like, right? And there's many agencies that are on different levels of the maturity curve of what that should look like.
Right.
So as we go into phase 2 and we start to add the credentialing and the things that are important from an identity perspective, really everybody's saying all the right things, right? I love what you were saying about the integration, and I think that that's the important piece, is that are we actually tying these systems and this information together to increase the security posture overall? And that is the goal, right? Because then we have a stronger community. I think it's important for vendors, as we look at, we have a couple of panelists that are vendors, it's important that we help our customers with the existing investments that they've made. What integrations can we make with third-party products that maybe aren't our own? Because that goal is really going to help us as, again, one large community be successful and also be able to ensure that we're cost-conscious as we do it.
Yeah, very good. You know, what I'm also picking up here is, a lot of the topics that we've had on this radio show over the years are now sort of like merging, and it's hard to talk about IDM without talking about continuous monitoring. Just like we used to have data center consolidation and cloud as totally separate subjects, now it's kind of hard to separate those two out too. You kind of like have to talk about them together. Paul Chrisman, what do you think on this issue of continuous monitoring and how it relates to identity programs?
Well, I think they're intimately involved with each other. It really does need to be the foundation for anything. And if you don't, as Jeremy said, if you don't know who's on your network and you can't validate that, pretty much everything else is just taking care of the machines, and that's not sufficient. I wanted to pick up on a comment, Jim, that you just
Okay.
made, and it's the convergence of a whole series of technologies that are being used to tackle this problem of security. And the number of conversations I've had lately that intersect mobility and identity, virtual desktop delivery and identity, big data and identity, cloud and identity, and everything goes back to identity
I
because
agree with
it's
you.
the foundational idea of giving people the proper access to the information when and if they need it. But it's that interesting idea that if there weren't a program like CDM that tackles this big problem in a very, very broad way across many agencies, I don't think we would tackle this issue of identity in the same way.
Right.
I think it's really great what DHS is doing. It's really, I think, giving seed capital to the departments and the agencies to move forward on what we all agree is necessary in order to enable this leap in productivity that involves all these other technology
Sure.
areas.
Yeah.
And again, a little commercial for Dell. I mean, we're seeing this across all of the technology spectrum that we offer, but it takes a major program like this to get through the bureaucratic and financial inertia that's preventing us from getting to this goal.
Yeah, actually, back to my point where I said if you get the identity piece down, all these other things are going to fall into place a lot quicker. Ashley, you have a comment?
Yeah, just one thing to back up what Paul was saying
Sure.
is there's a phrase that's going around out there that says identity is the new perimeter. And that really kind of is putting a bow on everything that you're saying. It doesn't matter if it's cloud or if it's big data or what it is. Knowing who's on your network through identity and strong assurance is just so important.
Good, I love it. Every show I get to pick up, plagiarize something that
you
someone
go.
brings things out that I can use again in other places. Jeremy, how about a lesson learned? What are you learning as you go through this process?
It's not about the technology. And most people think it is. I mean, I got to tell you, this is, we're now 3.5 years since the president launched NSTIC. We've been flooded with a lot of really interesting vendors, who have come up with the next great widget that, because it has a slightly better form of encryption or something else that's novel about it, they're convinced it's the most awesome solution in the world, and
Right.
the world will simply be overcome by its awesomeness, and we won't need NSTIC anymore.
Just buy this tool and everything's fine.
And it's just not that simple. The real barriers that are out there that where we really need to, more work, first and foremost, interoperability. If you have the awesome widget, how do I plug in with it, and how do I use it with the awesome widgets that are made by a dozen other companies that are out there that also have stuff that's candidly pretty awesome? Usability, how do I actually get consumers and employees to want to use these types of things? We know that people hate passwords, but getting people upset enough about passwords that they're actually willing to
Right.
start looking to alternatives has been something that's been difficult in the past. Although I think we're making really good progress there, particularly with a lot of mobile-based solutions. Business models, if I'm issuing a credential to you and you're using it to log into Paul's website, who gets paid for what? Who pays for what? These are some of the big issues that are really out there. It's much less to do with the technology itself, and more coming up with a framework of standards and business rules that actually enable the technology to be used in the ecosystem.
Yeah, terrific. Well said. Paul, some lessons learned as you're working your way through this stuff.
The biggest one, I think, is that we need to have our seniors, and everyone understand this is far, far bigger than just a simple identity problem. It's more than an ID card. It's more than simple authentication, both of which are important.
Sure.
But it's must think bigger, and our seniors need to understand that, as well as our end users. We need to work on what I call carrots, making that card stronger credentialing in general, more desirable for the end user, for self-protection and PI protection, and for our seniors who must take care of business processes. Example, for our card, we use it for digital signature. That's an anti-phishing tool.
Right.
Well, we should recognize it as such. It's more than just an identity.
Right.
We use it for legally binding digital signatures that allows us to go paperless on our business processes. That's also a very valuable tool. And so we need for our seniors to understand the broadness of the potential here for using identity to grant services, privileges, access, and so forth.
Yeah, excellent. All great points. Ashley Stevenson, what do you think in terms of some lessons you're learning as you work your way through these issues?
Sure. So I couldn't agree with Jeremy more on the fact that it's really not all about the technology. The other thing that I'm seeing is that identity and access management is such it's a broad topic. It touches so many different areas that when you're starting up any kind of project, you really need to look at what your dependencies are, and you can save yourselves a lot of time and effort sometimes if you build out an early dependency before you try to build out what you're actually doing. And one example of that is the consolidation of identity data. So in order to do a lot of these great things like single sign-on and federation and other things, you need to have access to the right sets of identity data, which often come from a variety of different sources. So you need that data integration in order to do those things. So that's one. And I think the second, my note here is, doing identity projects is so often about changing business processes. And in order to change business processes, you have to identify all your stakeholders and get their buy-in. Otherwise, the technology is not going to be enough. You have to change business processes, and you have to have your stakeholder buy-in to achieve that.
Right. And everybody gets so excited about change and things like that. I think I said on this show once before, I think it was Robert Kennedy, but don't hold me to that, said that 1/3 of everybody's against everything all the time, no matter what it is. Ellen, how about, or Fort Scout, how about lessons learned? What are some of the things that you would be passing on, say, to colleagues listening to this show that might help them with programs?
Sure. In light of continuous monitoring, one of the issues that we run into frequently is the reliance on an agent or something on that endpoint in order to track it. So what ends up happening is when you're relying on software or something on the endpoint to show visibility, then you run into a limitation of you're only going to see those endpoints with that agent or that software. So building a solution that allows visibility without relying on an agent is critical. It allows visibility into those rogue endpoints that are attaching to the network, or those unknown users that are attaching. So trying to think in a complete visibility, complete integration is important.
Yeah, excellent points. Paul Chrisman, what do you think are some lessons learned as you're working your way through these programs?
Well, I'm going to go back to I'm going to borrow a bumper sticker, and it's think globally but act locally. And one of the things that a lot of agencies that we talk to are struggling with is how to get a short-term win, how to get something that they can build on, but then also fit that into a larger strategy. I think the idea of starting with all of the things that could be tackled in something as complicated as identity management or continuous monitoring mitigation, I think some people get discouraged. So I would encourage them to think about the broader picture, but go for the short-term wins.
Yeah.
Go for things that they can build on, both technically as well as politically, organizationally, and claim a victory.
Cool.
I think that sort of go for the short win is something that we've learned.
Yeah. Kind of like agile computing, you know.
Sure.
Don't try to build the big thing
Lots of small wins
just
works.
take it piece by piece. Jennifer, what do you think? Some lessons learned over at Symantec?
Yes, I couldn't agree with Paul more. I do think the small wins are important, right? We've talked a lot about taking big programs and trying to evolve them. It's actually probably easier for them to take new programs that are up and coming that they want to attach identity management to, either in the cloud or in the enterprise. I think the other real issue is it a carrot or a stick, right? Are we incenting agencies to move? I talked a lot about awareness. Or are we going to provide a stick where we want some sort of mandate that comes with funding, right? So we can create a mandate, but can we attach funding? Look at the progress we've made on CDM. Everybody's really talking about how great that is. Could we do the same thing in identity? Where's the funding?
Yeah.
So that's my thoughts.
Sometimes it takes something happens, you know. I mean, we still are reactive somewhat, especially with funding. I mean, when cyber attacks get to be significant enough that people really start worrying about them, then the funding comes. So unfortunately, trying to convince people that we need to be proactive and get the funding out there before bad things happen is a real challenge for everyone. We want to talk a little bit about challenge. We want to talk a little bit about challenges and maybe then look to the future. But first, we need to take a short break. You are listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM. Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM. I'm Jim Fleisig here with Jeremy Grant from NIST, Ashley Stevenson from Homeland Security, Paul Grant from DoD, Ellen Sundra from Forescout Technologies, Paul Chrisman from Dell Software, Public Sector, and Jennifer Knoll from Symantec. We're talking identity management, continuous monitoring. We've talked about progress. We've talked about specific programs, lessons learned. What about some challenges? What are the hard things? Let's start with Paul Grant this time. Paul, what's something that a challenge you got to overcome to get to where you want to go with this?
There are always several of those. We're seeing progress. One of the challenge areas is getting some of our seniors to really appreciate that this is a cost of doing business. It's not a fine funds. It's a matter of, if I'm going to improve my processes, I must take care of identity and access management as a fundamental cost of business, and it's tied to my mission. So it's not the CIO's failure if something falls.
Right.
It's the general who's running the operation or the secretary who's taking care of perhaps healthcare. It's a mission failure, and understand that and then apply efforts accordingly. More specifically, it's getting down to a tactical level. Our relying parties knowing how to properly enable their applications to deal with this variety of credentials and getting the help to them so they can do it well and do it properly. In the past, we've told them, go do it without enough help, enough resources. So relying party implementation is one of our current issues I have in DoD. I think the executive branch does in general.
Yeah, very good points there. Ashley, what are some of the tough things, challenges that you need to overcome to get where you really want to go with these programs?
Sure. So as I said at the top of the show, I think that we've had a good focus on strong credentials and strong authentication, but I think it's time that we need to expand our focus out into administration, basically, what I call access lifecycle management, right? So this is really the processes we've been talking about, how it all gets tied together. This is the processes that tie together how people actually get access to something in the first place. And today, unfortunately, it's still very paper-based or PDF-based for a lot of the government, and industry's done a better job at this, but we can move those things online. We can automate the access life cycle, and what that does is it moves some of the data that CDM needs to be able to collect on that 72-hour cycle from being in a file cabinet, which you can't collect digitally, to being online and to being in a database that you can collect. So it not only increases the efficiency, but it also it digitizes the data that you'll need, and we need to expand our focus to that and put some effort into that, I think, within the government agency. And it's a lot of work, because that's
Sure.
where a lot of those business processes changes
Absolutely.
are that I talked about. So stakeholder buy-in and the will to do it, but the return on investment in that area is great.
Yeah, terrific. Jeremy, what are some of the obstacles? What are the hurdles you got to jump through in order to get where you want to go? I mean, it's, you got to secure the internet. I mean, how hard can that be?
Well, I'd say 2 points. So the first, we were talking before the break about, the challenge with incentives, carrots and sticks. And I often point out when it comes to talking about NSTIC, I'm an old poli-sci major, and I learned about legislation, and I learned about regulation. I even learned about executive orders as a way to force action across government. They never taught us about strategies back at Michigan, because it turns out they don't actually bring a lot of power. NSTIC's really a nice document signed by the president that lays out a great vision for the future, but it's an aspirational document. There's not a lot of teeth behind it, although I think you may see something very soon coming down the road that does bring some teeth behind some of what we're looking to do in government, perhaps even by the time the show airs. But beyond that, Jennifer also raised the topic before about mandates without money, and I think that gets brought up a lot in government, particularly around IT programs, but a lot of times, certainly with identity, I think it's kind of a hollow argument, because there's the cost of doing something, there's also the cost of not doing something. And, the reality is agencies are spending a lot today on identity solutions that are inefficient. They're spending a lot today on paper-based and phone-based transactions that are much more expensive than bringing them online. We did a study about 1.5 years ago in partnership with the IRS that showed that if they actually embrace NSTIC-aligned solutions and basically solve their identity conundrum of knowing who they're doing business with online, they could save up to $300 million a year, because the cost of the online transactions are much cheaper than what they're doing today. So sometimes you do need funding to get something done, and sometimes you just need to reallocate existing funds to spend them more efficiently. The more we can get folks focused on that latter topic, the sooner we can make progress.
Yeah, actually a good point. That IRS point, too. I actually think the savings would be significantly bigger if you can work on some of the identity theft issues there, which cost the IRS billions. Let's talk to Paul Chrisman here. Paul, what are some of the challenges you see?
Well, there's 2 things I'll touch on first, and that is, I think, Paul Grant mentioned the idea of the applications being able to accept these credentials. I think we're going to need to move away from identities tied to applications to identity as a service. And that's one of the things that is going to require a major retooling of the actual applications. You mentioned the travel application being used within the DoD. That application needed to be retooled in order to accept those credentials, and so many legacy applications have identities buried into the application logic rather than as a service that's provided outside the application. That's issue 1. That's a technical issue. It requires a turnover of the technology. Issue 2 is user adoption. And we sort of have an expression is you better give users an easy solution, or users will create an easy solution. And the users creating an easy solution usually is circumventing what you're trying to do.
Right.
The user adoption on 2-factor authentication has got to be easy. It's got to be transparent. It can't be a gigantic impediment to productivity. Otherwise, the users are not going to embrace it. And no matter how much you mandate it, they're going to find some way to get around it.
Yeah.
So
That's
user
important.
adoption has got to be part of the equation, and the agreement with them to actually use the technology change in strong authentication has got to be there.
Right. Terrific. Good. Well said. I want to change and talk a little bit about the future now. We always close the program out with a look, the panelists giving us their version of where this is all going down the road. So I'm going to start with you, Ellen, over at Forescout, and give us some ideas of where this is all going. What are some of the exciting future things we'll see when some of these continuous monitoring programs, become reality and down the road?
Sure. If I can be specific to Forescout, one of the things that we're very excited about is our Control Fabric platform, which allows this integration that I keep referring back to. And we are developing some deep bidirectional integration with these identity management tools, really filling a gap by informing those tools of when new devices come on, not only that a new device has come on, but what that device is, classifying that device and feeding that information into these tools so they can make intelligent decisions. We can also feed in associated workflow and auto-config privileged access. So we're making those tools smarter and thus increasing security. So we're very excited about our future integrations with that control fabric.
Terrific. Sounds great. Look forward to hearing about these things as they mature and evolve. Jennifer Knoll, what do you think? What's it look like down the road here?
You know, I gave a little preview earlier and of what my hope is for the future, and I think it holds true that our users should transparently be able to do business online, whether you're working for an agency or you're trying to get access as a U.S. citizen to some services. The security and privacy of that, the tools that are in place, Jeremy said earlier, it's not a technology problem. It's not, right? Many of us can solve that problem technologically. It's policy, it's driving, it's awareness. So my vision of the future is really that we will have one community and we are a safe nation because of it, and it's transparent.
Excellent. Well said. Well said. I like that. Ashley Stevenson, what do you think at DHS? How are you looking down the road? What do you see down, things happening and programs improving as a result of this work maturing?
So one of the things I see coming in the future is sort of a convergence between the Internet of Things or the Internet of Everything, which we're hearing more about, and something that the Conterra initiative calls identity relationship management. So as we move to the future with all these different things coming online, we've got traditional people, we've got their devices and all these other things. They're on-premise, they're in the cloud, and we've got all of our different communities of interest. We've got citizens, we've got our government partners, and we've got the people inside of our agencies. So to be able to manage all that, we're going to have to start managing the relationships between the people and all of the different things that they work with, right? And those things could be all different types of factors. But I think the idea here is that one of the things of identity relationship management is that not only are we using identity and access management to drive compliance, which is what we often talk about, but it really can be viewed through the lens of driving mission enabling, right? So people need to get access to do their things because they have a job to do.
Sure.
And focusing on that and focusing on enabling the mission as well as compliance, there's a lot we can do there with identity and access management.
Excellent point. Focusing on the business solution that you're trying to address here. Paul Chrisman, what do you think? What do you see this all going down the road?
Exciting future. What we see is the ability to have an identity that survives and is sustained over a long period of time. It's an identity that survives where you work. It's an identity that can be used for multiple purposes. It's interoperable. One of the most exciting things we're seeing is if you can adequately understand what this person or this individual has done in the past, you may be able to provide better services to that individual. You may be able to correlate service delivery. It could be healthcare. It could be government services. But if you don't have that longitudinal look at their identity and broadly define that identity and what they've been able to access in the past and maybe make recommendations on how to improve their lives using their identity and being able to have that interoperable historic look at what they are and who they are.
Yeah, I'm hearing interoperable, throughout the entire theme here today. It's clearly something that's resonating quite well in terms of an important topic. Paul Grant, where's this all going? Paul, what's it look like for you down the road? What are some of the exciting stuff that's going to be happening?
I think the exciting part is I've already discussed the mission. You can tell that I'm inclined towards very high assurance credentials personally. But we do have a population that we must service in DoD of our beneficiaries, retirees, spouses, veterans, a lot of industry partners who do not have the high assurance credentials. So one of our objectives is to provide incentives for our users, Jeremy's carrots, to want to opt up. And DoD policy addresses the concept of opting up from lower credentials to higher credentials, getting more privileges, more services in so doing. And so we're trying to find ways to incentivize our users, our partners, to want to opt up to stronger assurance level credentials. And to do that, some of the carrots, I've already mentioned the TSA pre-check for DoD Common Access Card, which should be extended, I think, to all executive branch PIV holders, an incentive. We discussed the PIV-derived credential for mobile devices, so giving strong credentials to include signature and encryption on mobile devices is a DoD goal, and I think is PIV-I. We are working with Washington Metro to run a pilot to accept PIV-I in lieu of the Smart Trip card. And that pilot should go into effect in the next few months. So another incentive to want to get a PIV-I instead of just another level 3 credential or 2 credential.
Okay.
Philadelphia has modified their contract already for the same thing, and Department of Transportation is helping us to expand this to all areas doing mass transit to use PIV-I cards.
Right.
Another incentive. And the last one that we're exploring is as we get secure near-field channel on the cards coming out of the new ANSI standards, is there a chance we can put the government travel card onto the PIV? And I think there is, as an EVM card. So I see all these things that would incentivize people to want to move to a stronger credential for many other reasons than just cybersecurity, but the net effect is cybersecurity posture of the nation is elevated.
Yeah, terrific. Well said. Now, but if we put everybody on TSA pre-check, will that make the TSA pre-check lines? Obviously, I have a parochial interest there. I like the fact that you get through quick, but
I only said PIV card. I didn't say PIV-I because the PIV card has a suitability check for employment as a government employee.
Right.
So there's a suitability associated with PIV that we don't have with other credentials.
Yeah. Surely I jest, and I do think as the thing goes along, I mean, the more of this that we do, the faster everything happens for everybody that's involved with getting through lines or being authenticated for some reason or being, someone trying to figure out who they are. Jeremy, let's talk about the future from your perspective. You've been you're, I guess, seen as one of the guys that's supposed to be carving out the future here, and where's it all going?
We're certainly trying. I'd say two things in addition to getting Ashley's colleagues at TSA to determine that I'm as suitable with the PIV card as Paul is with a CAC for getting through pre-check. One, I think, is the trend you're seeing both in government as well as, we'll see more in government and that you're seeing in the consumer space, which is bring your own identity. If I already have a strong credential that meets the requirements of an application, I don't have to go through the process of getting a new one issued to me. I can simply use something I have. And certainly this is what we're trying to drive things at with the Federal Cloud Credential Exchange, taking advantage of a growing ecosystem of accredited private sector credential providers. The other thing I'd say is I think people will focus less about identity and more about attributes. Identity is sort of a nice catch-all term, but it means a lot of different things. And I think what we find really matters when we're going online is not everything about us, but certain things about us. So I'm Jeremy Grant. I work at NIST. I live in Washington, D.C. I won't give you 7 other interesting attributes about me because I'm on the radio. But when I'm looking to engage with somebody online in either the government or the private sector, they really only need a subset of attributes about me that can be verified that then enables them to essentially de-risk the transaction and enable something to go forward. And I think people focusing more on decisions based off of attributes that are provided is something that's going to become much more prevalent as we go forward.
Yeah, terrific. Well said. Well, I'm going to try, as I always do here, to summarize what I've heard today and kind of make some concluding comments. I've been jotting down some notes. We talked about progress, and I think some of the things that came out here were the frameworks that are being built, the pilots that are being worked off of those frameworks, the move towards stronger credentials and trying to move away from passwords and get into a position. The awareness issue. Awareness continues. We continue to make progress with awareness to try to get a lot more people involved, a lot more mass behind this. Heard a lot about coordination, coordinating across government, coordinating with the work that Jeremy's doing, and so forth. When we talked about specific programs, the ones ICAM jumped out pretty quick, as did I was impressed by hearing how PIV is growing and growing. You're up to 85% over there at DHS. We heard about the Federal Cloud Credential Exchange and progress being made there as an example of a program that's making a big difference. And then this framework came up multiple times as being a key player and something that is helping drive a lot of this. As we talk a little bit more about the continuous monitoring side, we talked about the need for real-time monitoring because threats are in real time, so we need to be able to respond. We talked about moving from just the authorization to the privilege issues and looking at how that would work in a continuous monitoring world. And what I really love is the comment, identity is the new perimeter. I love that one. I thought that was resonated great for the program. We talked about lessons learned. We talked interoperability remains a big issue. We talked that it's not the technology, that there are things other than the technology. You need business models. You need management backing. You need to look at changing business processes in order to adapt. And you need to get ways for users to step up and for users to adopt it and want to use the systems. Challenges, we talked about, again, getting management behind it because there's a cost of business. And you have to impress upon management that you do need to put the funding here to make this work. We talked about the challenges of keeping it all tied together. The interoperability issues, and you got to stay focused on that. We talked about getting some teeth into these programs, that, a piece of paper is not going to make it work. There's got to be something that's a driver that forces some behavior in the direction of wanting to use the system. And we talked a little bit about its identity as a service. Are we moving to a model where it would be more of an identity as a service model? It seems like everything is as a service these days, so why not identity? Future, we talked about better integration. We talked about better business processes and services. Jeremy made some excellent points about attributes versus identification and identity and how important that will be. With that, we had, again, another full show with a lot of content. I love doing the show because you all make me smarter. As I bring smart people on the program, you help keep me informed. So let me first thank the panelists here for taking time from your busy set schedules to be with us here today to share your ideas. Thanks to our sponsors, without which we don't have a show. Thanks to all the good people here at Federal News Radio, do such a great job with making this stuff happen and taking care of all of us. And most importantly, thanks to our listening audience who's out there listening to the show. You've been listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM.